the creator of the Rutledge Perspective podcast, and now I am the host of the Rutledge Perspective on KCOH TV, The Boost, and I am so excited. My background in human resources and also in business and consulting has given me the opportunity to share information with all of you, and what we're going to do is talk about the foundational pieces, whether or not you're building a business or you're building a career. It all comes down to strategy and people. If you don't know where you're going, how do you know who needs to be on your team? So please join me, join in the conversation, catch the show both on the radio, on the app, and also on Facebook. And I will be on Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you there.
Good morning. It is Tuesday. Talk It Out Tuesday. Me and Jerry P. Beasley. So today we're still continuing our month of talking about power. Speaking truth to power is today's topic. And I do have some public service announcements. But so the first thing y'all see, I don't know if you can see it. So see, I'm still wearing my vote pin. See? Because we still have runoffs in Georgia, y'all. Okay? We still have runoffs in Georgia. So remember, November 18th, they're supposed to be doing the mailing out ballots. December 7th is the voter registration deadline. And here's why this is important. For those young folks who will be 18 by the time the election happens, which is on January 5th, if you're going to be 18, you can register to vote, right? So check your birthday, go read, don't just take my word for it, go do the research like we always talk about. But the registration deadline is December 7th. December 14th, in-person voting begins. And then election day is January 5th, 2021. So this is for the Senate runoff elections in Georgia. There are 2 seats that had to go to a runoff in Georgia. So that's still happening. That is still happening. And I want to say thank you to everybody because we did on the 13th, Friday the 13th. See, 13 is my lucky number. A lot of people hate 13th, but I like 13th. We actually surpassed 3,000 unique downloads for the podcast. So, woo! Thank y'all so much. Please continue to pass it on. I'm trying to get to 5,000 by the end of December. So please pass it on. Please send comments. I'm on just about every platform. I'm even on Amazon Music. It's the Rutledge Perspective podcast. So please go look at it. Go download it. See if there's something you want me to talk about. Just let me know. I'll do that. So yeah, give me a like, give me a heart, give me a something. And that way I would love it. So the third thing is there is this great program. Good morning, Mama Young. Good morning, Houston. Morning, Sarah. There is this great program that is coming your way. And I have to apologize because the guy sent me, Steph sent me some detailed information and I printed it out and ran out the door without it. So I'm going to give you the overview and then I'm going to post it on my Facebook page. I'm also going to post it in Instagram. So I'll post it on LinkedIn so you'll be able to have it. So it is called Tigers. It's the Gratitude Reward System. So, you guys have heard about like Ebates and Rakuten and all this kind of stuff. It's similar, but this is deeper and broader. And we're really trying to target November the 27th. And I was trying to get back to that, but it'll cut off my live if I do that. We're trying to get to November 27th. And it's in partnership with the Blackout Coalition. So what happens is there is like a QR code that you are given as a business. We're trying to get businesses related. And every time a customer buys something at your business, not only do they get a rebate, which is cash. It's not like every 90 days. It's not like just coupons or credits or anything like that, cash. But also there's a portion of the donation of the money that actually is a donation to a charity of choice. Okay, so you actually are able to give back. You're able to say thank you to your customers by giving back to them. And you're able to continue to build kind of that connection and build community. And it's really creating a share economy here, right? A share economy, sharing in the wealth. Many, many nonprofits are hurting. So this is a way, if you have a small business in particular, that you can continue to help and donate to some of these charities through people buying your services. The other thing that's positive about this one is the businesses, you don't have to, this is not multi-level marketing, all that stuff that we're, Amway and all that kind of stuff. This is not multi-level marketing. That's not what this is. because you as a business owner, a small business owner, you get to set what that rebate is going to be, and you do not send anything or pay anything or give any rebate until an actual cash sale or an actual sale is made. So there's no kind of buying product, none of that stuff. This is not multi-level marketing. This is creating a share economy, making sure that we can continue to push dollars into the community. So I will be putting more information on all of my social pages. Please look at that. If you have small businesses, I will also have a link so people can decide if they want in. They can click the link and you will get directly to the people who are doing that. They can give you the information. They can get you signed up. So if you come through the Rutledge perspective, at least they will know this is where you heard it, because they're trying to advertise as well. So good morning, California. So it really, really is a program that is so helpful for small businesses and for nonprofits at this time, and for communities, because it's giving back. If you buy something, you get something back. So whether you are a service or a product or any of that, this is fantastic. It's also a way for organizations to build into their budget. It's a way for school systems to build into their budget. So it's just, they have taken some of the other programs and just put them on steroids. So I will be passing more information on to you. It's called the Gratitude Reward System. The Gratitude Reward System. iSwirl is out of Canada. You can find him on Facebook. I got all this stuff, guys. I'm going to post for you. So please think about that. I think it will be really great. And we're trying to do a really big push on November 27th, on Thanksgiving Day, the day of giving, the day of giving. So let's really think about that, and I'll get the information out to you. Okay, so what we're talking about today is speaking truth to power. I just recorded my podcast this morning too on this same topic. And, we've been talking about power all month, and the word power and how we use power and who's in power and all of that kind of craziness. Because we throw that word around a lot. But here's the thing about speaking truth to power. There are 3 key components to speaking truth to power. One is the actual information that you're talking about. One is the inclusion of all of the people that have the different information. And the third is service, because speaking truth to power is not about you. It's about serving the greater good, about serving to get to whatever the outcome is that you're trying to get to. That's what speaking truth to power is. But overarching all of those is this whole idea of how you deliver the message. And part of how you deliver the message is understanding why you're delivering it in the first place, and then understanding what culture you're in or what situation you're in so you can deliver it in the best way possible. So I want to start with, there were a couple of quotes that I read as I was thinking about this one this week. And there was one that really, there were several that stuck out to me, but this one really caught me again this morning. I am constantly amazed at how courageous and radical speaking the truth is. That was Melissa Etheridge. Think about that. How courageous and radical speaking the truth is. Because y'all, there is such a thing as truth. There really is such a thing as truth. And so for it to be so radical is just I just had to kind of chuckle at that, because she's right, how radical it is to actually speak the truth. And then Deshane Stokes, I had not heard of him, but he's got an interesting story, and I actually think I'm going to reach out to him. His quote was, "Truth is hard, propaganda is cheap." Mm-hmm. Truth is hard, propaganda is cheap. I thought that was apropos for what we're going through right now. What about y'all? So truth is hard, propaganda is cheap. So again, it is not always easy to speak the truth. It is not always easy to speak the truth, but it is imperative that we do so. And then Barry Sanders was talking about speaking truth to power, and his perspective was, it's a flabby kind of statement, speaking truth to power. He said, because power already knows the truth. Power already knows the truth. It's really ourselves we have to tell the truth to, which I thought was an interesting perspective, and this is called the Rutledge perspective. So I want to incorporate all of that as we talk about this speaking truth to power today. So let's start back with those things: the communication, the inclusion, and the service. So the thing about when you're speaking truth to power, there's got to be something you got to talk about. And so sometimes you're speaking truth to power about a behavior. Sometimes you're speaking truth to power about an action that's being taken or a project that's going on or something like that. But there's always some kind of information that you have that you believe the person that is in a position of power or is making a decision or who is moving things along does not have. So the information itself becomes the currency, right? What is it that you know? What is it that you have that the other person needs to have, that puts the person in power? And power doesn't necessarily mean position. Power doesn't necessarily mean position. It could be someone who is a CEO or a VP or something like that also, but it could also mean just somebody who is a really big influencer. And we talk about that even in corporations. Who are your best influencers inside of a corporation? They may or may not be in a position of power, but their power is in their ability to influence. So what is the information that you have that you need to get to this person who is making a critical decision or taking action or impacting something, and you know that there's some information that needs to be had in order for that decision or that action or that movement to be less risky or to achieve the outcome that is desired? So understanding what information you have and why that information is important. Then it gets to kind of this inclusion piece, which is part of the problem in speaking truth to power. And we talk a lot about, now the thing is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But here's the deal. All those things, the diversity piece is the easy piece. That's the easy piece. Hire people that don't look like you, promote people that don't look like you, that don't think like you, all that kind of stuff. That's the easy piece. The hard piece, and even equity to an extent, is easy, especially if you're talking about monetary equity, because you just do that. It's just money. Just do it. That's easy. We can always fix money. In fact, when I was an HR person, sidebar, if somebody came to me and was all concerned, I don't make enough money, I don't make enough money, I don't make enough money. I said, okay, you don't make enough money. Well, I'm going to take that, I'm going to put that in a little bubble, I'm going to put it over here. And I'll talk about what's really the problem. Because generally, it was about a whole lot of stuff. And, oh, by the way, I don't make enough money. Because again, money's easy to fix. You may decide not to fix it, but money's not a hard thing to fix. So equity is not necessarily the hardest piece. Inclusion is really the hardest piece of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because inclusion forces you to open your ears and open your mind and open your heart to hear somebody else who has shown up, who looks different than you, thinks different than you, believes different than you, has different skills than you, has different experience than you. That's inclusion. Inclusion is active. Inclusion is active. You have to be inclusive. You have to ask people to participate. You have to reach out to people. Inclusion is the hard work. And so when you're talking about speaking truth to power, especially if you're in what's considered a power position, the inclusion piece is what is important. How are you ensuring that all of the people there feel included and feel important enough and connected enough to be able to tell you what's going on and to share information with you that may be critical to everything you're trying to do? Inclusion. And then service. Often, is there a word that's stronger than often? Like rapid, all the time? We forget that speaking truth to power essentially isn't really about us. At its most basic sense, speaking truth to power is about the other person, right? They're exhibiting a behavior that is problematic, or they're about to make a decision that is high risk, or something like that. It's not about us, it's about them. And generally, it's not even about them, it's about the impact of what they're about to do on an entire organization, right? So it's really about service. How are you serving other people, the organization, the committee, the whoever? That's what it's about. So speaking truth to power, you have to have information that is necessary, critical, important, impacts what's going on. You have to include people who have access to this information that may be critical to you. And then you have to think about it in terms of service. It's not about you. It's not about you. Speaking truth to power is not about you. It may impact you or have an impact on you, but it's not about you. So then we get to the hard part about speaking truth to power. And that is the delivery. That's the hard part about speaking truth to power. Because that's where the fear comes in, the reluctance comes in, the courage comes in. That's where your active listening comes in. That's where mind control, body control, language control. That's where somebody might need to stand on your tongue before you say something. It's the delivery is where speaking truth to power gets hard. Because you have to really understand where you are, what the culture is like, what the person is like that you're speaking to, what you guys are trying to accomplish. You got to understand all of that. And then why the information you have is important, so that then you can find a way to deliver the message in a way that is heard. Not only heard, but understood. You still may not get what you want. They still may not agree. They still may not get it, but they can't say they didn't know. And I know for me, that was always a big thing. It was never about just me, just about making sure the decision was mine, making sure I was aligned. It was, I want everything out on the table. So whatever decision we make, nobody can say they didn't know. No one can say they didn't know. So when you're thinking about the delivery of your message, a part of that is ensuring that everybody, to the best extent possible, has full information before they take action or make a decision. And that means you have to have a delivery in a way that people can hear and understand and accept. And that's what becomes difficult, because it requires us to not think about us. It requires us to be observant. It requires us to think broader and bigger than what we normally think about. It requires us to be outside of self. And that's not always easy, especially if we're in a situation where it's like, this is just not working and I've got to say something, but we're fearful. Or we're really angry and upset because they should know better. Because some of us are in that situation too. They should know better. This just doesn't make any sense. They should know better. And so sometimes we're just not in the right mental space to be able to deliver a message in a way that's being heard. And if it's not heard, nothing can be done about it. So the point of speaking truth to power is making sure that your message is heard. Whether or not they do anything with it is the next phase, and irrelevant, and it's got nothing to do with you. The delivery has everything to do with you. So when you think about that and you think about how you deliver, part of that is really understanding the culture that you're in. So you've heard me talk about noisy organizations and quiet organizations before. And I love a noisy organization, because noisy organizations, people are talking about stuff. They're having conversations. They're quick to respond. They're quick to jump in. They're quick to say something. Quiet organizations are concerning, because quiet organizations, often there is stuff that people know. There's information they know. There may be things that are mission critical that they know that they are reluctant to say anything about, that they keep to themselves. Or they may share like within a small group of people, but they're never going to say anything to the folks who can actually make a decision. You know, I hate to use this just because we just had I can use it because we just had a really successful space launch. I remember when I was working at Deloitte, and we were first starting to talk about risk management. And one of the partners that I worked with, he said, you know, here's the thing that people don't understand about risk management and about speaking up is, if you think about the Challenger disaster, which was horrendous, and we lost lives with the Challenger disaster, it wasn't that no one knew what the issue was. It was that there wasn't a mechanism or a culture that enabled that person to say something up to the people who could do something about it. So it wasn't that it wasn't known, it's that it wasn't communicated. And that gets back to delivery, and that gets to culture, and have you set up a mechanism so that people can participate, that people can engage, and that people can give you the information that's needed so you make the best decision possible for your safety, for their safety, to manage risk, to move forward, to be successful. And that delivery of the message is how you ensure that it is heard, that people can act upon it, that they understand it. If you're the leader, are you creating a culture where people can bring things to you, even if it's unpleasant? Or have you created a whack-a-mole culture? Every time somebody pops up their head to say something, they get whacked, right? That old game, whack-a-mole. I used to love that game, whack-a-mole. Mm-hmm. Have you created a whack-a-mole culture? Because if you have, then you can't get mad when somebody says, well, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. You can't get mad at them because they didn't share it with you, because you created a culture that says they couldn't. Or you created a culture that told them, if I share it, the damage to me is so great, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Or you have such a reputation for hurting people or slamming people that they just as soon see you fail, even if it hurts them. Which is probably one of the worst kind of cultures you want to have. They'll go down as long as you go down too. That's not what you want. So you have to really look at how you deliver your messages and in what manner and what mechanism. So, you know, my parents always told us you criticize in private and praise in public. if you have someone where what you're trying to share is a challenge with behavior, the behavior is not appropriate, or the behavior is causing reactions that are unwanted, or it's a failure to communicate, you don't necessarily want to call that person out publicly in front of a lot of their peers. But you may want to pull them aside and say, hey, can I talk to you about something? Because just by pulling them aside, you have demonstrated one, concern for the person, right? It's about service, concern for the person. A willingness to understand that it is about the message. It's not about public humiliation. You really are concerned about the person. And you want them to hear the message in a way that they can do something about it and still protect themselves and their reputation. So think about if it's a personal message, a behavioral message, is there a mechanism where you at least initially need to communicate one-on-one? Now there's all kinds of stuff around that, right now. Just make sure you're doing the right thing and protecting yourself and protecting them and all that kind of stuff. But essentially the bottom line is, do you have to call whatever this is out publicly? Or can it be done one-on-one? Because sometimes calling out things that are very hurtful publicly serves the exact opposite. The person retrenches themselves into that behavior or into that perspective because you've now embarrassed them or humiliated them. So they're going to dig in and they are not going to let that go. So think about why you're communicating the information and then what outcome do you want, and based on that you determine what action you're going to take. Again, we talk about this all the time. There's a strategy to some of this. Now sometimes that moves really fast, right? You're thinking about it really fast, but you really have to think about what you're saying and why you're saying it, to whom you're saying it, and how you get your message across the best. And that's not to say we're all perfect about that, and we have those moments where we just kind of lose our mind, right? And we're not as gracious in our delivery of messages as we could be. And that happens because we're all human. But if, for the most part, we can make sure we take time and pay attention, that is the best for us and for those around us. So you want to understand kind of how you may need to deliver one-on-one. Along the same lines, talking about noisy and quiet organizations, if you're in a meeting and you're talking about something that is controversial or is heated, or there are differences of opinion, you happen to be in a noisy team or a noisy organization or what have you, and everybody's just yelling and screaming, or not even yelling and screaming, but really just jumping in. I mean, it's just noisy, right? Jumping in, talking about it, throwing spaghetti up against the wall, trying to see what's going to stick. I mean, it's just, one of those kind of things. If you're jumping in the mix, you are not necessarily being heard any different than anybody else. Everybody's message is getting lost in some form or fashion. But if you're in that and you sit down, sit back, start talking really softly so that people have to really strain to hear you, your message might actually be heard above the fray. Why? Because they physically had to change, because you moved out of space, so your physical proximity changed. You sat down, so you got kind of out of the mix, and you started talking much quieter. So they physically had to pay attention to be able to hear what you were saying. And again, you have to know people and understand kind of the situation you're in. Sometimes you can't just go and just, plop down. You may have to physically move from the front of the room. I mean, it has to be something that is noticeable. And then when you're talking quiet, you're actually getting people's attention. And again, we talked about this last week, when sometimes it's about who the messenger is. Whether or not we hear the message depends on the messenger. That time when your parents were yelling and screaming at you versus that time they got real quiet and either didn't say anything or said it really quiet. Which one really got your attention more? Because after a while, when people just keep yelling and screaming and talking loud and talking fast, and you stop listening. Because it doesn't change, right? That's why music is so wonderful, because music changes, right? That's why those modulations are important, because it keeps our ears engaged. That's why when you hear some music, people just get bored, right? Your ears even turn off when it's the same beat all the time. It's the same chord all the time. It's the same, because it doesn't change. It's that modulation that gets our attention. It's the change that makes us have to pay attention. And so if you are engaging or operating or talking differently than all of those around you, being visible, because you can't disappear because they won't hear you then either. But if you are modulating the way you are engaging, you have a greater chance of getting the attention that you need to share the information that is critical. And that's what's important. Because again, speaking truth to power is ensuring that information that is necessary is communicated. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an issue. The issue is there is someone in a position of power that doesn't have information that is needed. And you want to make sure that you understand the culture you're in so that you can communicate it in a way that is valid and helpful and heard. And that leads to another overarching kind of piece, which is fear. A culture of fear. That challenge when if you are the lone voice that says no, if you are the person that brings up something that nobody else thought about that could crater the project. These are the kinds of things that are critical. You have to speak up. So for example, guys, and it's not easy. I am not claiming that speaking truth to power is always easy. I am not claiming that being the one dissenting voice is easy. It is not easy. But leaders don't expect everything to be easy. You do what's necessary, not what's easy. So years and years and years ago, I was helping with an acquisition. And we were reading through a ton of contracts and all this kind of stuff. And of course, I was doing the HR piece of this. And so I got all the contract information, and I had not been part of the negotiations. So they had already negotiated it and what the price was going to be and all of that kind of stuff. So we were just kind of putting the rest of the deal together and how we needed to make what things we need to make sure that were in the contracts. And I remember looking at the contracts, the employment contracts for some of the salespeople, and moving these folks. When we acquired this business, the salespeople were going to be a key piece of the business because it was a relationship-based business. So the relationships that the salespeople had were really a key piece of the value. This is why HR people, I tell you, you need to know as much about business, if not more so, than the business people. Okay. So I understood that what we were buying, it was a relationship business. We needed the salespeople to come with us because that was going to keep the relationships, which was going to keep the sales, which was going to keep the product, which was why we were buying the business in the first place. So I get all this information on the salespeople, how many they are, what they're paid, so we can figure out how we're going to integrate them into our processes. And I start looking at some of the employment agreements for some of the top salespeople. And not to get too kind of technical and in the weeds and stuff, but there were some things in the contract about non-competes. And so if you've been in sales, a non-compete agreement just says things like, okay, if you leave for the next 18 months, you can't go work for a competitor, or you can't sell this product for a competitor or something like that. Basically what businesses are doing is protecting their intellectual property. They're protecting their relationships if you are in a key position and then go somewhere else. So it's not unreasonable, but some of the statements or some of the contracts have been unreasonable, but the concept itself is not unreasonable. Of non-compete agreements. So there were some non-compete agreements. I thought, okay, great. We just need to understand what those are so we can understand what we might need to negotiate in terms of ensuring they can actually work for us when we buy this business. And as I read through these contracts, there were a couple of them that said, oh, and by the way, if the business is sold and if the new business decides to enforce the non-compete agreement, then they will owe these people tens of thousands of dollars. In some cases, six figures. And so I looked at this and I thought, that can't be right. And so I talked to the attorney. I said, hey, can you just make sure I've got the latest contracts? Sent those to me. They were the same thing. So I went back and I said, did you see this? And he said, oh yeah, I kind of looked at it, but I didn't really pay attention to it. You know, HR stuff, that happens too. It's HR stuff. HR stuff can crash a deal, y'all. I'm telling you. HR stuff can crash a deal, okay? So I went back and I contemplated and I said, we're about to spend a lot of money to buy this business. And we need to understand this. And I remember getting to our next meeting. I was working on the team. And I told the team, this is what I found. I said, we've got to say something. Well, I don't know, and they're already down the road for the deal. And I thought, no, we got to say something. Nobody wanted to say anything. And I decided, well, you know what? This is just real information and it is going to come back and bite us. So my failing to say something doesn't make it go away. And that's something you have to ask yourself. Does my failure to communicate this key piece of information make this thing not occur? If that's the case, then yeah, maybe don't communicate it. But if it's going to happen anyway, you need to say something. So at our next big meeting with the CEO and the attorney and, the head of sales and all this, I said, okay, so here's what we found. And I pulled up the contracts. Here's what this specifically said. And oh, by the way, remember, we've been talking about this with our salespeople about non-competes and how we protect our business and protect our market. And if for some reason we decide to enforce this, this is what it means. Have you guys baked this into the deal? They had not seen them. They had not read them. They had not paid attention. They were stunned and shocked. These were the top salespeople for this organization. Now, subsequently, we were able to go back and we made it all work. But the point of that story is, had I not said something, had I not spoken truth to power. So again, the CEO, the general counsel, the head of sales, who were all invested in this deal. Papers about to be signed, right? The letter of intent was already out there. I mean, it was moving. But I knew the information that I had was critical to the success of the sale. And more importantly, critical to the return on the sale. In other words, it impacted money, right? So I had to say something. And so I encourage you, when you get in those situations, it is important to step back, figure out a plan. I didn't just go in there raving and wailing and, oh my God, I can't believe it. No. I went in there with, here is the information and here is the impact. Now you guys got a decision to make. Here's my suggestions, right? We need to do something with price, or we need to make sure they do this before we buy it, before we close the deal or something, right? Put it back on the seller. But I had to say something because I knew the ultimate impact was going to be significant. And it was in my wheelhouse. It was in the HR stuff. So who was I not to say something? Because the expectation, and here's what people don't tell you. The expectation is that you do everything deeply and broadly in your area of expertise. People don't necessarily say that out loud, but if something goes down and you should have known, then it's, why didn't you know? Why didn't you say something? How come you didn't? And it's a valid question. How come you didn't? Why didn't you say something? Right? So speaking truth to power does take courage. But if you can plan, and if you know why you're having to say something, and then you can make your message around the why it's important. Again, it's not about you and it's not about them. It's about the thing you guys are trying to do. In this case, it was about an acquisition we were trying to make. And these contracts had a significant impact on the ultimate return and value of the purchase we were making. It was really important. And so I had to step away from my concern about what they were going to say and whether or not they were going to believe me and all this kind of stuff, and really say something, speak truth to power. Now, it was also, and it was an environment that was not necessarily non-toxic. It could be pretty toxic most times. It could be pretty challenging at most times. However, sometimes you just got to step up, guys. You just got to step up and step in and just be cognizant of the risk and make a plan. We talk about that a lot. Make a plan. And understand what their argument is going to be. I knew their argument was, we've already signed the letter of intent. We've got to buy this business. We've got to do all these things. So I didn't come in saying, you can't do this. I came in saying, here's what I found. Here's the financial impact of that. Here is my suggestion of how we can still do this and minimize our risk. So I didn't in any way tell them they couldn't do it or they shouldn't do it. I just said, if you do it this way, this is what the impact is going to be. So I got a suggestion to do it differently. So when you're talking about speaking truth to power, it's not always just about saying no. Because if all you're doing is saying yes or no or maybe, it always trickles down to that because I said so. What does that mean? Right? Because I said so. That means you don't have a definitive argument. And as the saying goes, don't raise your voice and prove your argument. So when you're speaking truth to power, you want to be prepared. You want to be able to have just as much information and just as much background on the thing you're talking about as the person with whom you're having the conversation. That's critical. Because if you don't know at least as much as they know, then how are you going to give them the information they need to make the decision that they make? And that takes courage. And it takes a willingness to assume some risk, especially if you're in toxic organizations. It's a willingness to assume some risk, or a willingness to understand, you know what? I'm not willing to take the risk right now. And this is why. And if that's where you are, then I would say there's a deeper conversation you got to have with yourself about why you continue to stay there. And it may be time to make a plan to do something else, somewhere else. Because if it's truly that toxic and you're truly that concerned and that afraid, there's something else going on that is ultimately going to impact your ability to continue to do what you need to do in the way you want to do it. And that is no way to have to work on a daily basis. That gets old and tired and it's just hard. That's what makes it hard. So when you're talking about speaking truth to power, you really want to make sure that you are sitting in understanding of the need for courage. And sitting in an understanding of how you need to deliver your message. Again, I didn't tell them they couldn't do this. These are data-driven people, and they were highly ego-driven, good people, but highly ego-driven. And this would have been embarrassing if they weren't able to go through with this deal. So knowing that, again, knowing why I needed to share the information, why? Because it was going to impact return. In order for me to get to how, I had to understand who I was talking to. Heavy ego, lots invested in this deal, going to be really reluctant to not do the deal, but not going to know what they need to do to fix the deal. So we'll need help to do that if I'm going to get them across the hump. So knowing that, I needed to then use that and incorporate that into how I was going to deliver the message. So when your stomach starts boiling and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to say this. I don't know if I should say this. Stop, pause, practice the power of the pause. Why am I sharing this information? And then how do I share it in a way that I know they're going to hear it? And that's knowing your culture, knowing the people you're talking to. Do I need to share this confidentially? Do I need to get just a small team together so that we can collectively decide on an outcome or a potential management process for this thing and then present it collectively? Have those conversations. Take a minute, because if you've been down the road and nobody knew it till now, a few more hours isn't going to kill it. A few more days may not even kill it. Take the time to make a plan so that you can respond in a way that gives the people that need the information the ability to then make a different decision, to save face, to save the project, to change their message, whatever it needs to be. So your planning enables them to then respond publicly, especially if you've given them information privately. So speaking truth to power does require courage, but it requires a plan. It requires a strategy. It requires a willingness to stick your neck out for the right reason, and a willingness to modify how you send your messages and what messages you send based on who you're talking to and what the situation is. Because you can't deliver every message the same way. You can't deliver every message to the same people or to different people the same way. That's what leadership is. Leadership is not position related. There is some leadership that comes as a function of being in a position, but leaders can be anywhere in an organization or in a family or in a community or on a committee. Leaders can be anywhere, regardless of position. And so understanding that part of your leadership is ensuring that you are giving free information, giving information freely when it's needed, that it's clear, that it's received, that it is connected to something that's important. That is the kind of stuff that is critical. Because if you don't do that, you're not leading. And if you are willing to just have the person fail instead of you saying something, that's a different conversation you need to have. That's a different level of examination you need to have around why you're still there. Because speaking truth to power is critical. We're seeing it now play out in many different levels. When you don't speak truth to power, when you just support the emperor walking around with no clothes, crazy things happen. And you create a culture where nobody's willing to say anything and people suffer. You have to be willing to say something. Somebody's got to say something, even if it's not popular. Because leadership is not about being popular.
Because as you said, saying nothing is saying something.
Exactly.
And so
Silence is consent.
When you see, and then I'm using today's example of what's going on in the world, where special governors and different people of power, influence, say nothing, is that an agreement?
Silence is consent. Silence is consent. So if you are silent, you know, in the face, and I always get this quote wrong, if you are silent in the face of things going wrong, you have taken the side of the oppressor. Right? If you are silent, that is consent. People say that all the time. If something's going on and you say nothing, people assume you agree. So if you don't agree, it is in your best interest to say something.
You know, it's odd because I was looking on Facebook and somebody was saying, I just really think the church doesn't need to get involved in what's going on in the government. Let God handle that. And I was responding back and I said, no, that's contrary to what I believe. But I believe that the church, if anybody, should be more vocal and more outraged. Even Jesus was outraged at the things that were going on in the temple. But there is a belief system in some who believe that you don't deal with the emperor, you don't talk truth to power, you don't stay in your place.
Stay in your lane. Yes. Yes. And that's why we have some of the things we have. And it moves everywhere from, you know, family relationships all the way up to government, right? There are some situations where you're just not supposed to say anything. The head of the household makes all of the decisions. There's no conversation. There's no communication. There's no questioning. There's no nothing. There are principals in schools who specifically tell teachers how they're going to do it and when they're going to do it and what they're going to do, beyond allowing for creativity and flexibility based on what the students need. There are government officials who say, no, this is what we're going to do, and it impacts so many people. So it's at all levels. And that's why I say it's not necessarily positional that relates to leadership or power. It is also influence. What kind of influence do you wield upon people? And more importantly, what kind of influence do they believe you wield upon them? Because sometimes it's not even about real power. It's not about real power. It is about what people believe your power to be. That's why people stay in abusive relationships for so long. That's why it's really hard to leave toxic work environments. Because at some level, at least in the beginning, we believe that the person has or the organization has power over us, that we don't have a choice, that we can't leave, that we're no good, that we're not smart enough, that we're all of those insert things here that make you not worthy. So some of this influence in speaking truth to power, and the challenge with speaking truth to power, is because those in the positions of power have convinced us that they have that power. Not out of respect, not out of experience, not out of their expertise, but because they have wielded it in a way and above people and over people who enabled them to do so for whatever reason. Sometimes just because of complacency and we just didn't think about it and weren't paying attention. Sometimes because of fear. But the person who's wielding power doesn't always have power except power that we've given to them. So that other thing about stand in your power, take your power back, that's important too. So when you're speaking truth to power, part of that is taking your power back, taking your voice back, understanding that you absolutely do have a choice and you have a position. No matter where you are, you have a choice and you have a position. And if you see something, say something. We learned that when we had the bombing at the Boston Marathon and all of those things that occurred afterwards. And people started saying, if you see something, say something. It's occurring right now. There was a big article in Texas Monthly about Rice University here in Houston and how they have some of the lowest rates of COVID there and all of the work that they did to really get prepared and have student involvement, because you got to get student buy-in. And first, let me say, it's got to be hard. I can't imagine being a college student right now, because this is not what anyone expected of the college experience, right? So bless y'all's heart. All I can say is hang in there. Hang in there. Do the best you can and hang in there, and please stay safe. But the thing about Rice is they put together, specific rules of dorms for people who are going to live on campus. And then they put together kind of this student court specifically related to following the rules around COVID response, right? And COVID safety. And they did it, they did it with students on purpose, because they knew if it was just administrators, it just wasn't going to be seen as fair or understanding or any of that. But here's what's happening, and this is why I say speaking truth to power is important. Here's what's happening. When you have something like a pandemic, when you have something like, the plague or any of those kind of things that happen, and it impacts the globe and tons of people, and there are rules that need to be complied with in order to at least promote safety and ensure as many people are safe as possible, you create this subsystem of, it's unintended consequences, right? You create this subsystem of reporting people. So we want contact tracing, right? We want people to get tested. We want people to be safe. If people are not following the rules, we want to know so that we can address that. But what happens is that then gets taken to an extreme. And so there are personalities who then are like the Gladys Kravitz, right? They're watching everything that every neighbor's doing, and they're reporting, they're calling the police, they're doing all those kind of things. If they just don't like it or they don't like the person, they're just reporting everything they can see. That's on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is because you have those people, you got people who feel like they are afraid to even function. What if I just make a mistake? What if I just walk out of my car and I don't have my mask, and then I have to walk back to my car to get my mask, and on the way back to my car, somebody reports me because they say I'm on campus without a mask, right? So then you got people who are now living in fear of just existing because they don't know who's watching, right? So everything, guys, everything in moderation. We as a nation tend to swing the pendulum. Now, had we swung the pendulum in the beginning and really kind of made people do what they need to do, maybe we wouldn't be where we are right now. But that's a discussion for a different day. But we have a tendency to swing the pendulum in these extremes. And when you're talking about speaking truth to power, you also have to be mindful of the culture that you create, not only the culture around being afraid to speak truth to power, but also the subculture of those who are close to the emperor managing the message and maybe doling out punishment or what have you to people that they don't like or don't want, or information that they don't want to get there. You get this gatekeeper syndrome. We used to call it, I think when I was in Spain, they called it the doorman syndrome, right? Because they had so much control over who got in the club and who didn't. And so you create these subcultures sometimes when you're speaking truth to power of folks who are in the inner circle, and they determine what gets in and what doesn't get in. And that may or may not be accurate, and they are imprinting their own perspective on what gets to the emperor. They're putting a filter on it. And so when it's not easy when we talk about speaking truth to power, because you get all of these things around it that make it difficult. And yet we must be willing to speak truth to power.
When you brought up a point, and I just want to kind of address that, when you said that we need to be able to speak truth to power, what about those that speak for power? When you were saying you have people saying different things and different areas. I was thinking about this young lady that's on the Democratic side of things, and there's an argument between the party, inside the party, about who said defund the police. And
right.
They said that's not his message, but there's one that is very vocal. That's what we want to do. What about those type of people who speak for power, but it may not be the power's truth?
Right. And that's what's really difficult, because there are people who will take the position of being the spokesperson. They'll just take it. They haven't been designated. They haven't been given it. They haven't been, allowed to have it. They just take it. And there are many people who do that. And those are the people, just like the people who are abusers. And abuse can be multiple things. It doesn't have to be physical. It can be emotional. It can be verbal. There's all kinds of abuse. People who do that, they just take that position. And so if in speaking truth to power, if that is happening, part of speaking truth to power is also telling the person who really is in power, this person is speaking for you. And this is what they're saying. If that's not your message, you need to nip that. But if no one is even willing to say that, because they're afraid that this person who has taken the reins of being the spokesperson, that's where it gets difficult. And that's where you start getting people trying to build like coalitions, right? So I don't want to do this by myself. Do you guys agree? How can we do this? Can we all go talk to him? Can we all go have a meeting? Can we, because sometimes there's safety in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But there are many, many, many people who will take on the role of spokesperson. I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And one of the things that is really important and that they were stressing during this election period was, yes, you can wear your insignia, you can wear a shirt if you go to vote and all this kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. However, you cannot in any way look like you are speaking for the sorority as a whole. If you are not the international president of the sorority, you are not speaking for Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And so they sent that out to the body like multiple times a day, right? Because people get on and they're talking and they're speaking, and you have to be very clear that you are not speaking for the organization. And so what happens is, if the people in power aren't very clear, if you don't hear from us, it's not from us, then those people who are seizing the power and putting themselves out there as spokespeople become the people that are believed. So part of speaking truth to power is calling that out too.
That's good, because even here with the radio station, I'm often told the announcers you have not the permission to use the logo unless it's approved to use the station logo, because what you're doing may not be what anything that the station is involved in. But I also see that with Scott Atlas. He said something on Twitter, and the school which he works for had to come back and said his views and opinions have nothing.
Exactly.
So you have to kind of do that damage control to separate yourself.
You do. Even when LinkedIn first started getting really popular, I was at an organization. They were like, no, you absolutely cannot do any recommendations for anybody. You absolutely cannot do that because it looks like it's doing from the organization. Now I was in HR and I'm like, okay, stop it. That's just ridiculous. Because now you're telling people on their personal profiles what they can and cannot do. We're not going to do that. That's not who we are. What we can do, though, is say, as long as you're working here, if you're giving a recommendation to somebody, make sure that it is a personal recommendation. And you state in your recommendation, this is a personal recommendation, not as a representative of blah, blah, especially if you're an executive, right? You have to be very careful if you're in an executive role, because people will assume that to be gospel and use that for something. So it is important for you to distance yourself or to clarify when you are speaking for you or you are speaking for others. It's really important. And you have to tell people over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. I think it's what the standard is. You have to tell people 5 times before they get it.
Yeah.
And then you keep telling them because they'll forget, right? So when someone is seizing power and not speaking for the body, you also have to speak to that because they have seized power. And speaking truth to power means speaking truth to that too. You don't speak for me. That is not what we said. That is not our message. That may be what you want, but that is not what we stand for. Period. The end. Full stop. But you have to be willing to do that. And you have to be willing to pay attention and to listen to perspectives that are different than yours. You have to be willing to at least entertain what somebody has to say to you. Now, you got to know people. You got to know who you're talking to and all that kind of stuff, because there are people that I don't entertain.
I will say, yeah.
At all. Because I know who they are, right? You know who not to entertain. But if it's just that you don't want to hear something, sometimes you just need to sit still and hear what you don't want to hear.
Okay, is this wrong? I'm asking, like you're a doctor. If the person always comes with ideas for you to do, but they don't have the ability to do it, do you have to keep entertaining that? Because anybody can have an idea, but it's more work for you to do and they're not going to do it.
Right.
So do you entertain that?
So it depends on what you're trying to get. If you're trying to get a whole bunch of ideas, I would entertain every idea. You never know when there's going to be something gold in an idea.
Right.
But you also establish a process. This is an idea, you never follow up. You're not going to do it. If I do it, you don't own this idea because I actually execute it. But you establish that early. It's not unkind to be clear, and be clear early so there's no confusion at the end when somebody's trying to, get their piece of the pie or whatever. Just like Taylor Swift just had all of her masters sold, and she's salty.
Oh.
But she didn't own them.
Dang.
Didn't negotiate and get clear in the beginning. Didn't speak truth to power in the beginning. So someone else owns all of her masters for her early music. And they just sold them. And what she's saying is they didn't even give her an opportunity to buy them back.
Yeah, that's bad.
So again, speaking truth to power. not being so desperate. That's the one thing that was in Lenny Kravitz's book when he talked about it's Let Love Rule. And the book is really about how he got to Let Love Rule, that first big album. And he talked in there a couple of times about offers he would make, recording offers, and he just said no. It just didn't feel right, right? And one in particular where the money just wasn't right and the ownership wasn't right and all that kind of stuff. And he had his dad with him at this one. And they were like, are you really going to walk away from this deal? And he's like, yeah, I am. Because something didn't feel right, So sometimes you have to walk away. And it's not easy to walk away. It is not easy. It's not easy to walk away. It is not easy to walk away. But sometimes you have to walk away. Because if it's not right, trust your gut. If it's not right, it's not right. And something that's right is waiting for you. So remember that speaking truth to power, again, is not just about position. It's also about those people who are wielding influence. That is a type of power. It is people who are controlling things, right? So you may be in an organization, there's a CEO, but this organization is very finance driven. So really the person in power is the CFO, not the CEO. You just got to pay attention to that stuff. We cannot go in blind, and especially women, and especially women of color. You can't be blind to the organization that you're in. You cannot be blind to the culture. You cannot go in with rose-colored glasses, although we love to do that. You have got to be savvy. Because if you're not savvy, you get hurt.
Now, what if, let's say this, there's a system in place.
Mm-hmm.
You have the COO, you have the CFO, you got all these folks.
Right.
Somebody comes in and says, I'm going to go speak truth to power. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a system in place.
Mm-hmm.
So they skip one of the processes of the system.
Mm-hmm.
But then they're brought back
Mm-hmm.
to the other process of the system. What happens then?
Well, it depends. So when you're speaking truth to power, again, that's why I say you got to understand your culture. You got to understand the message you're trying to give and why. Because it may be that your strategy is, I'm going to go up this chain of command because this is important. But if I see it stopping at a certain point, I'm going to skip level. Because most organizations, yes, you have the chain of command, but you also have the option to skip level. It may be unwritten, but it is what it is. And if it's critical enough that you need to skip a level, you skip a level. You just understand what that means. And sometimes when I've done that, I go to the person and I'm like, look, so here's the deal. I went through the chain of command. It didn't go anywhere. This is critical. I'm just giving you a heads up that I'm moving. You're not asking permission. You're just giving a heads up. And make sure you got something on the calendar so they don't in-run you, right? So it is okay to circumvent the chain of command in some situations. It just depends. And I know people hate that answer, but it really depends. And that's why I encourage everybody to really be open and clear and honest about the organization that you're in. Don't go in, don't bury your head in the sand. Don't put on rose-colored glasses and think everybody's doing the right thing. They are not. They are not. Not everybody has your best interest in mind. I think I told the story on here, in the podcast I have, the crow story, that not everybody who lifts you up and shakes you off is your friend. So be mindful of who you're talking to and how you're talking to them and what that power wields, because you have power too. We all have power. It's just how we use it. It's just how we use it. So that's the deal today, y'all. Go out and speak some truth to somebody. Check out my social later on today, because I'm going to be posting about the gratitude reward system, especially small businesses. If you have small businesses that you think would be great to participate in this, again, it is putting cash back in people's pockets. It is putting cash back in nonprofits. It's a way to say thank you to your customers. It is building a share economy that we all share in the wealth. Okay, so I'm going to be posting that out there. Georgia, go get registered if you haven't registered. There's another opportunity, and vote.
Hey, what can we do with Georgia? I mean, I know you told people, Georgia still needs to vote. And
Yeah.
Is there anything that other cities and states can do?
So there's still a lot of activity on when we all vote.
Mm-hmm.
So you can absolutely still help with call banks. You can still, even if you're remote, you can probably get on there, go to Georgia, go to the State Board of Elections, go see what you can do to help. You can donate. You can still donate, right? So there are things, the money always helps. So you can donate, you can get out the message, go on your social media, remind people Georgia still has 2 Senate races coming up. So just don't let it fall out of public eye. Again, that's why I still have my vote thing on.
That's good. Because I think people think, well, I can't vote. There's nothing I can do. But I woke up this morning thinking, what can we do?
I'm telling you, we can't let Stacey Abrams down. That's what we can do.
We can't.
Because that woman, that's what I'm talking about, speaking truth to power. And when everybody's yelling, you get quiet. She got quiet, and then she made it happen. That's what I'm talking about.
That's the way
she made it happen. She
the
didn't argue and scream and yell and fight. She said, okay, I got you. Now I understand. I understand the rules. Now I'm going to play the game. I'm playing chess. You're playing checkers. We're going to make this happen. And she registered voters. And she didn't go out and just say, I'm just registering Democratic voters. That's not what she did. She helped to get 800,000 people registered in Georgia. 800,000 people, y'all.
And she deserves those accolades.
Absolutely.
She really does deserve those accolades, because I see other people come in at the last minute. When we did it was group effort, whatever. She deserves the accolades.
She pushed
and I
it.
like what you said. She got quiet.
Yep.
But she got busy.
She got quiet and got busy.
That's good.
And they even say that about your business, about your goals. You know, when people don't support your vision, Lisa Nichols says that. Don't be upset when somebody doesn't support your vision, because God gave it to you, not to them. The other piece of that, I would say, is don't be telling everybody what you want to do. Sometimes you need to tell your goals because you want people to support you. You want prayer around it, right? You need that moral support. But sometimes you just need to get quiet and make it happen. Just get quiet and get to work, as Jerry Beeson said. All right, y'all. Right? Don't talk about it, be about it. All right, y'all. We'll see you next week. Go speak some truth to power. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it. See y'all next time.